I'm the sports professor, Rick Horrow, and on behalf of SEICon and UNLV and Syracuse and all the brain trust behind it, I'd like to welcome you to the first of many SEICon events, potentially all over the globe, sports, entertainment, innovation. And let me just harken back with an apology to my friend who will be part of the panel and a little later, Brandon Steiner, the memorabilia king. This, believe it or not, is the first Miami Dolphin ticket ever. It's been in my wallet for over 50 years. I know it ought to be in a better place, but this was at a time where I came back to Miami and I realized that the team wasn't going to lose because we were undefeated. They apparently didn't get the memo, but that inspired my work in sports. And effectively, look at where it was. The franchise values at the time, George Steinbrenner bought the Yankees about 6 months from this time, 50 years ago, for $10 million. The average revenue for an NFL team, under $4 million. The average baseball salary, $26 grand. And this ticket, by the way, even though it's signed by Don Shula as a forever in my wallet, $5. Well, we've come a long way. 46 years later, the metrics that I just talked about increased 47,000%. I don't even know what that means. That's a hell of a lot of money. And when you think about it, the business of sports broadly defined over $1.3 trillion. Why? It's also the most highly visible, some say the most controversial, metrics-wise, the fastest global growing industry of all, something special. But morphed to March 11, 2020, the entire world shut down. Rudy Gobert tests positive for COVID in Oklahoma City when he's playing for the Jazz. Everything shut down, and a week later, by the way, the industry loses at a clip of about $12.2 billion a week. Nobody knew, remember those days, if we were going to survive, let alone how we would recover. But just like 100 years ago, sports helped us, Yankee Stadium building and otherwise, recovering from the Spanish flu pandemic in the 1990s into the roaring 20s, we ushered in a new roaring 20s because of COVID recovery. The Dolphins just turned down a $10 billion offer from a hedge fund guy to buy all of their assets. The Cowboys, parentheses, they didn't see the memo that says you got to play well, are worth $9 billion or more. Nil, we'll talk about that, is over $3 billion industry and growing strong. And when you think about it, the NFL TV contracts, which we all know about, nearly $200 billion. Imagine getting that check when you go to the mailbox. The point is, we've been able to recover. Why? Well, 3 words. First of all, creativity, unprecedented. Second of all, cooperation, collaboration, best practices. And third, maybe it's negative, maybe it's not, but survival of the fittest. The strongest survive. Urgency, you got to get better because only the strong are surviving post-COVID. Well, we've emerged from COVID, and thankfully, we're now heading in the right direction. So, where do the next 50 years take us? Past, present, and future. Well, we need some thought leadership. We need some international dialogue. We need some creativity. And by the way, what about the whole mantra of the challenges we face? Well, the people you're going to see in the next 2 days, are all about this. How do you put the Nil toothpaste back in the tube, to mix a whole bunch of antiquated metaphors? What do you do with globalization? We're all scared the crap out of us with AI. How do we harness us for the good of the industry and good for the athlete? Franchise free agency, venue free agency, player free agency, globalization. They're not scary. They are great opportunities. So what do we need? We need somebody that comes along whose mantra is this: the first of its kind sports, entertainment, and innovation conference, bringing industry leaders from around the globe to educate, collaborate, and create dynamic venues together. Well, guess what? At SEICon. That's what we're talking about. 48 panels all together as they solve the gridlock problem in Vegas. Everybody will be here. 200 expert witnesses, and all about vision. You all are part of history, because this will be the first of many in an incredible thought leadership context put together by visionary entrepreneur Sean Garrity, by UNLV, by Syracuse, and you'll meet a lot of those folks today, tonight, tomorrow. Incredible brain trust. Here's the point. Strap it up, focus, deal make, be entrepreneurial, take this in. This will be the first of many. And as Sean likes to say, and we should believe it, the best is yet to come. Thank you all very much. Enjoy the conference. But the people who really matter are those people on the bottom of the screen. Circle puts it together, but it's a tremendous joint venture with UNLV and Syracuse University. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we start. The first person I want to introduce for his opening remarks is the person that basically, in many ways, created the athlete agency business. David Falk co-founded Falk Associates Management Enterprises in 1992, and he revolutionized the way NBA contracts were structured. He negotiated the first $100 million contract in NBA history for Alonzo Mourning, played a pivotal role in establishing lucrative shoe deals and endorsements for his clients. We'll talk about that. Oh, and by the way, Bald Truth, Success of Secrets from the Locker Room to the Boardroom, talk about his insights. He is instrumental in putting this program together on behalf of Syracuse University and beyond. And, oh, by the way, he is Michael Jordan's guy. He'll tell you all about Air Jordan and the brand. Let me bring out my good friend and mentor in many ways, David Falk.
Thank you, Rick.
Floor is yours.
Good morning. Welcome. I'm glad you all are able to make it. We have a little logistical problems outside with the president coming here, so appreciate you being here. So for me, I've been in this business for 50 years. I created Falk College 19 years ago. The inspiration was my mother, who was a teacher. I wanted to do something to honor her career in education. And the first 10 years of my career, I primarily did tennis. I really didn't know a lot about tennis, but the company I worked for represented most of the major American tennis players in the 70s and the 80s. And I gravitated to what my passion was, which was football and basketball. So at this conference today, as someone who's been in team sports, which requires teamwork, we've had sort of a merger with UNLV, with Jay Vickers. And I think that we're trying to sort of combine two of the top programs in the country, trying to bring some of the top people in the world in sports. Over the next couple of days, you're going to meet some of the best and the brightest in all areas of sports. And because the conference is concentrating on innovation, we're not talking about things, we may talk about them as a guideline for the future. We're not talking about things that happened 10 or 15 years ago. We're trying to give you all a flavor for where sports is going over the next decade, over the next 20 years. And it's changing dramatically for a variety of different reasons. Changes in the media. You all saw that NBA made their new deal. Streaming has become an important part of the equation. Live sports has become more important than ever for the television networks. We're in an age of technology. Technology is having a major impact on the way the game is presented, on the fan experience. Analytics has overwhelmed the sporting world. We're very proud of our program at Falk College, run by Rodney Paul in analytics. We won the national championship in all three sports this year. So I'm very proud to be a part of this conference. Sean Garrity and Jay have done an amazing job of putting this program together. It's really taken 2 years of planning, and you're going to hear, as I said, from some of the most influential people in sports talking about current issues. Women's sports can play a very major role. And so I'm very proud to be part of this. And with that, turn it back to Rick.
But more important was David's partner in crime. They both collaborated early, Sean implementing. Jay Vickers is the Chief Operating Officer of the UNLV Sports Innovation Institute. Strategic direction, leadership to position UNLV as a central hub for sports and entertainment innovation in Vegas. That's wrong. It's entertainment innovation around the globe. He graduated from Notre Dame with a bachelor's degree. He played football at Notre Dame. And most important, he was the MVP in the Japan Bowl as a running back at Notre Dame, most important. And nobody forget it. Jay Vickers, thank you for being here.
Well, first and foremost, good morning and welcome to SEICon, and more importantly too is welcome to the sports and entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas. It's great to see so many faces. I know we have a little bit of traffic issues outside as relates to more faces here, and I saw a lot of these faces last night, so some of those faces may be sleeping right now due to last night. But beyond all that, we're so excited to get to this point, and I know no one can be more excited than the people on the stage. As I believe David talked about earlier, we've worked on this project for over 2 years. This isn't something that you wake up one day and say, hey, look, how do we put together a conference that we can inspire, motivate, and move folks to really understand how do you build a sports entertainment innovation capital. There's a lot of intellectual folks in this room, and I encourage you all to share that knowledge, be educated, collaborate, but also do some deal making, meet some new friends, talk about not only where you're represented from, whether you come from another city, another institution, communicate with others and learn how to collaborate in ways that can move forward our great industry. This is one of the best industries in the world, sports, entertainment, and innovation. If you feel that way, can I get a hand clap for that? I'm a sports guy. This partnership is unique because of people who are willing to be forward-thinking, think outside the box, and that's what I want to thank our friends at Syracuse for. Thank you, David. I want to thank our friends within our institution ourselves, our friends at our Governor's Office of Economic Development, our team, our Sports Innovation Institute team, but also our students. Our students are working together in building this endeavor, which is, I believe Rick said earlier, there'll be more to come. This is just the first start, and we're just scratching the surface. And as you can see, it's all about being strategic and thoughtful, and that's how you win games. That's how we will win on October 4th. For those who are Syracuse fans.
We'll talk about that.
No, we got to talk about it now, but as we go. But beyond all that, I'm just really happy to have you here. And again, welcome to Las Vegas. I wish you an amazing SEICon.
Thank you. I know we got to stay on schedule, but I don't want to let this pass because this is kind of the birth of a baby metaphorically. So I want to just talk to you guys about the epiphany. When did you kind of first contact each other? You know, it's interesting because there's not a normal cultural alignment between UNLV and Syracuse. I know there's history about schools, but how did you guys first connect? How did you first realize that, hey, this is a real idea, and then going from there? Talk about it.
The first thing with any type of collaboration, it starts with the people. And so I will gladly say that the Syracuse folks are just really, really good people and really wanted to collaborate with our institution. And they were really impressed with what we've been able to accomplish here at UNLV. We have great leadership in President Keith Whitfield, who has done a tremendous job of, one, understanding that we need to break silos. And we need to be able to think forward and be progressive in what we do every day and build real profound partnerships. So I would start with that, and they embrace that very well.
Sure. So there's a gentleman named Sean Garrity who's the head of Circle Sports. Sean lives here in Vegas. He's on the advisory board of Falk College, has been for almost from the beginning. And Sean and Jay started a partnership. I have to tell you that when I managed Michael Jordan his entire career, he was only in 2 commercials that had anyone but himself. One was the Muhammad Ali, and one was at Larry Bird and Charles Barkley. I always wanted to be alone. And after 19 years of trying to build the Falk College brand at Syracuse, initially the idea of collaborating with anyone was a little bit outside the box for me. It wasn't where I thought we'd go. But when I met Jay, we spent a lot of time together, and I realized the incredible things they were doing here at UNLV. I thought there'd be a natural symbiosis of combining our forces. I think that was a great decision. I give most of the credit for the initiation of this partnership to Sean, getting together with Jay. And as someone who loves team sports, the one thing you always want is you want someone to block for you. So while Jay was starring in the Japan Bowl, Sean was an offensive lineman at Syracuse, and he opened up a lot of holes for us to create this program together. So really appreciate Sean's efforts.
So the final comment in the opening statement is the first of many annual trash talk, banter, executive opportunity between the 2 co-founders. So we've already heard that Syracuse has won national championships in every, blah, 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 land grant, you've been there for 9 million years, so it's important. UNLV, a little later to the game, maybe arguably the best basketball couple of years, 90, 91, 92, ever. But so there is a match that I'm sure wouldn't have happened but for this collaboration on October 4, Allegiant Stadium. No matter how many people will be at the stadium, by the way, because of AI, it will look like there are 150,000. So it's going to be huge. UNLV plays football against Syracuse, as you may know. So Vickers first. Who's going to win and why?
The Rebels will win.
Because?
Because that's the way God makes it.
Wow. There's an answer for a guy who played football at Notre Dame, MVP Japan Bowl. So Falk, who's going to win?
So Syracuse is going to win. We have a dynamic new football coach named F.A.M.E. Brown, who came from Georgia. He reminds me of a very young John Thompson. He's stressing education, discipline. Spent a lot of time with him, love the guy. And I think he's going to get these guys really fired up to get the program started off on a new footing.
Well, I don't know what the spread is yet, but we will send you the information about the spread a week in advance so you can get some inside information. Just kidding. It's a big game. Just remember, when you watch it, the collaborations, and we said best yet to come, that's football. But on the academic side, on subsequent SEICons, this is the first of many. And personally, I'd like to thank, as the host and MC, David Falk for being such an incredible mentor, and Jay Vickers for bringing this world in and becoming an incredible new friend. Thank you both for doing this.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, man. Jay, appreciate that very much. We'll have a chance to spend time with Jay later on, obviously, too. So, all right, we're formally into the session that is our first of our 4 keynotes. And this one is called Head to Toe. And I think you understand what the structure is, but it's all about signature shoes and the business behind it. It's become a defining element of superstar athletes' brand equity, from the iconic Nike Air Jordan 1 OG High to Reebok's Shaqnosis and beyond. I think the 2 panelists will have something to say about both of those. Off-the-court endorsement deals are more popular than ever, thanks to creative, stylish, and innovative technology and engineering of apparel brands that are attracting male and female athletes on a global scale. The 2 panelists are seminal and defining. You already heard and know about David. But Todd Krinsky is the CEO of Reebok. He's been appointed in September 22 after more than 30 years with the company. He started either as an intern or the mailroom, which he tells me is not simultaneous, but that's the way it was. And he held various leadership roles, including Senior Vice President of Reebok Design Group, significant role in the creation and success of Reebok's partnerships with athletes and celebrities, Allen Iverson, Jay-Z, now the Authentic Company entity, which he'll tell you about. but he also was part of the executive education program at Harvard Business School. It contributed to the strategic growth and leadership of his. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. Thank you.
We have a lot to talk about, but let's start with this.
David Falk taught me the evolution of business, how to utilize my likeness, my personality, my basketball talent, and channel that into the business aspect of Michael Jordan as a person.
Everyone who's been represented by David turns out winning. He really takes good care of his people, and we've become great friends, and my life has gotten a lot better as a result of my association with David.
I think the only person I've ever met who's more competitive than David Falk is Michael Jordan. I think what's made him successful is his tenacity. He never stops.
The business relationship that would come to define David Falk began in 1984 when he became Michael Jordan's agent.
He saw something that no one's ever been able to do, and he basically, with a blank sheet of paper, created his own perception of what he felt like he can, develop in terms of an athlete who had great personality, who come from a great family background, who had great potential from a basketball sense, and a bunch of companies looking for that type of marriage. And he carved out that that whole persona, that whole Michael Jordan perception with corporations that everybody to this day has been trying to emulate.
I told the companies, sort of like the famous John Kennedy line, ask not what America could do for you, but what you could do for America. I said, I know what Michael could do for your company. I want to know what you prepared to do if we sign with you for Michael. And Nike got it. I said, if you are interested in signing Michael Jordan, you've got to give him his own line. You got to treat him like a tennis player. I want his own line of shoes and clothing.
The whole premise of having your own shoe, no one knew where that would go, and if David knew that, then he understood the crystal ball. I think he had a vision without a doubt in terms of the first athlete being able to have their own signature shoe coming out of college. I think that was a great vision, but in terms of where that would lead us, there's no way, I could sit here today and say that 30 years ago we would be a billion-dollar brand.
Incredible history. It's about the best thing you could possibly encapsulate as far as David Falk's Michael Jordan career, but as we know, there's so much more. Before we start specifically back and forth, tell one good story about Michael Jordan.
I got a million of them.
The best.
We'll come to that. Let's come back to that. I got to think of the best one.
Okay, good. It was there are so many of them. So Todd, when you kind of started in the industry,
I got you.
Oh,
Okay.
you got it? Okay. Sorry, he didn't listen to me anyway. Go.
So, some of you may know, I produced a movie for Michael called Space Jam in 1996, and Michael had hundreds of offers to do movies, and I turned them all down. And one day he came to me and said, I want to ask you a question, why have you turned down all these movie opportunities? Now, Michael loves to tweak you nonstop. He makes you better at what you do. It's affectionate, it's good-natured, but constantly tweaking you. But he doesn't really like when you do it back. So I said, why we turn down the movie offers? Are you freaking kidding me? Because you can't act. There's only one role that you could play. And he said, what's that, the first black James Bond? I said, no, the first Michael Jordan. And so, hence we did Space Jam where he played himself, stood 7 weeks in front of a green screen like you do the weather, and the movie was a tremendous success. But when they came back to him and asked him to do a sequel, they offered him $10 million for 3 days of filming. No mas. That was it.
So he won't rival some of the best directors and casting directors in the world to try to make somebody different than they are. That's a very truthful guy, and we'll talk about representation, how important that is. Todd, we were just going to start about your kind of history in the business. You've been with the company for 30 years, so you know the inside and out, not only of Reebok, but the industry as well, and now it's bred into authenticity. Working with other folks in the industry, tell me about your relationship with David and how that started and where that went.
Yeah, I mean, this is really a full circle moment for me today, and one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here. And so, I did actually start in the mailroom, and I worked in the mailroom at Reebok for almost a year and a half, just hustling to try to get a job. But Reebok was very entrepreneurial back then, and the founder of Reebok, Paul F.A.M.E, would listen to anybody who had a good idea. And there was this kid at Georgetown who was just killing it, and we started to internally campaign to sign Allen Iverson. And I'd just gotten a job out of the mailroom, and I was in the boardroom, and I was screaming, "We should sign Allen Iverson, sign Allen Iverson." And we ended up actually signing him, and David was Allen's agent. And so then, in 1996, I had a chance to go down to DC, a very surreal moment for me. I mean, I worked with a lot of great athletes and celebrities now, but back then I had never really worked with any of them. And so the first thing was just actually going down to DC and sitting in David Falk's office was surreal in itself, Michael Jordan's agent, But I had to keep stoic. I mean, we're still negotiating, and I can't be asking the agent for the autograph when we're negotiating a deal. That wouldn't have gone over well. And so meeting David was great, and then about an hour later, because he's always late, Allen Iverson rolls in, and he had this amazing aura about him when he walked in. It's like there's only 2 athletes I've ever worked with that had yet to be pros that I met, and when I met them and just looked at them, I said they're ready for everything coming to them, and it was Allen Iverson and when we pitched LeBron James. But the thing I remember about David the most wasn't just because we did have a prototype that day of a shoe to show Allen, which is one of the reasons I think we got the deal. But David started grilling us with all these questions, and the reason I bring it up is because it's the fabric of the way that I think today when I try to structure a deal. David says, not about the shoe, not about how many appearances we're going to do. He's saying, what is the lane we're going to choose for Allen? How are we going to talk about him? How are we going to promote him? What's the story going to be? It was all about this storytelling, and that is so big today, but wasn't as big back then. And it put me on my heels for the first time because I thought I was going there to show a shoe and to finish a deal. But I think I learned a lot from David about the art of storytelling and how important it is that when an athlete and a brand get together, there's gold in what you're doing together. And I think that's what David taught me back in 96, and I still try to practice today. And that was the beginning of working with David.
You work with the Todd Krinskys of all of the companies. What was so special about Todd? Did he get it earlier than most people?
Well, I loved his passion. I think this is a business that's not about numbers, it's about concepts and passion. And you have to understand, in 1996, there still weren't very many players in the NBA that had their own shoe. Now, to paint the picture, understand that Allen Iverson, who came from Virginia, was the state player of the year in both basketball and football. And throughout his high school career, he wore Nikes. Comes to Georgetown for 2 years, played for John Thompson, who is the second senior most person on the Nike board of directors. And Georgetown wore Nike. They had the Kunta Kinte cloth and the uniforms. And we went to Nike with Coach Thompson, and they were pretty arrogant by that time. They had Jordan, they had a bunch of guys, Penny Hardaway, and they made us an offer that I thought was, inappropriate in the market. And so when I met Todd, I basically said to him, you have an amazing opportunity to have a breakthrough, to take a guy that grown up with Nike. And in my opinion, and a lot of people that will not agree with this, you asked me over the last 30 or 40 years, how many players in the NBA really sell shoes, not simply endorse a brand? I would say 2, Michael Jordan and Allen Iverson. And Allen was such a unique personality. He was the first crossover guy with hip-hop, the way he looked. He was an incredible athlete. And I think Todd got it. And he understood the opportunity, understood the window of opportunity, and Reebok did an amazing job, I think, executing who Allen was.
Yeah, and it's a teaching moment, too, because you also mentioned off camera that you kind of insisted, and I'm sure you do that today, or did, that every company have some kind of a promotional commitment. in the deals to make sure they tell the story.
You know, one of the interesting things in sports is that, you know, people measure everything by sheer dollars. Like, you know, the most important thing in making an autographed signature shoe work is the creativity of the company, the support they put behind it. You just can't put the shoe on the shelf and hope that people come buy it. Especially at the beginning, you have to establish, you know, a demand for the shoe. And I think that right away, there was just a natural connection between what Reebok was doing and what Allen's doing. I think a lot of the shoes today, you could slap someone's name on it, they're all the same, you know, and I think very few of the players today are really big enough to carry their own brands. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that, you know, back then, we were creating moments. Like, it wasn't just selling a shoe. These were pop culture moments that we were creating, whether it was Allen Iverson with Jadakiss that some of you may remember, or Barkley talking about being a role model that Rick mentioned when we were talking earlier, or all the great Michael Jordan moments, the Penny Hardaway doll. Like, these were just great, great moments. And it was never just about launching a shoe. It was creating these experiences for the consumer and telling great stories. And I think, you know, I sound a little old now. I mean, I do liken kind of the sneaker business, a little the music business, and I think through social media it's gotten a little oversaturated. There's just so many sneakers. I mean, I can't even keep up. Every player has a sneaker now. Every month there's 3 or 4 launches. And back in the day, it was a little more special. A launch was an epic moment with a TV ad and a big time athlete in a great shoe. And yeah, you have to adapt to the new days, but I think David's right. Like, I think there's probably a saturation of kind of athletes that have shoes today. And I think it's going to start to play itself out a little bit more, and I think it's going to start to move to kind of the real special ones getting product as we move forward.
Go.
So the other thing I think is a lot of people overlook, you know, you look from the outside at this business and you see these high-profile athletes and these allegedly high-profile agents. And what it really requires to make this thing work is a partnership. You have to be on the same page. So going in, you know, the money will follow if the concept works. And so, you know, people think that you're constantly at odds, you're pushing the company, you're demanding things. You got to do all that up front. And then once the deal's done, you're partners. And if Reebok doesn't do a great job as your partner, you're not going to make a lot of money in royalties. And that's really what you're achieving. I mean, we talked about this, you know, over breakfast. In my opinion, if a player who's on the fringe, who's not a unique player, a Shaq or a LeBron or a Jordan or an Iverson, you could literally go to the guy and say, I'll make you a shoe, and I'll pay you, you know, $10,000 a year, and I'll give you a royalty. And if you're really great at selling shoes, you're going to make a ton of money. And if you're not going to make a ton of money. And the idea that you have to pay some of these guys, Michael wasn't the highest paid guarantee at Nike. He was when he was a rookie by a mile. He signed for 5 times more than anyone had ever gotten in the league. But after a while, it became irrelevant. And they signed players for more guaranteed money than Jordan made. And I thought that was really silly. Once you have the best, the rest of them, you need to produce. And if you don't produce, then you're probably not worth the time and the design and the promotions that it takes to make a program work.
I think the one other thing I would say, because I have a team that's working with me now that does the deals, and they come to me and they're younger, and the secret of a great deal is that before the deal gets signed, before the contract's done, you're looking across to that athlete or that celebrity and having a real conversation about what each partner is trying to get out of the deal. And I'll tell you that 9 times out of 10, it's better to go with somebody that may not be as good or may not be as big a celebrity, but is buying into what you're doing as a brand and you're buying into their values and what they're trying to do. Those deals are going to be 10 times better than going after the superstar celebrity that really doesn't care about the brand, is just looking for a check. And today's consumer is so much more savvy than when I was doing it before, that they see through that. And you can see which athletes really rep the brands they're with and which athletes really live the brands they're with, and which ones are looking for a check. And even though some of those athletes are better, their product doesn't sell as well because the consumer's not buying into the relationship. And I think that's a lot of the magic of what this industry is about. To David's point, it's not just about the promotion, it's about both parties really buying into each other.
And by the way, a teaching moment, because this is a great conversation relative to Reebok and Jordan and Iverson and shoes, but it's more important about deal making. When partners are entering into a business conversation, and people hear this trite win-win-win, but they reached a point in deals where you trust each other and you have a common vision and you're both committed to putting that common vision in action, right?
Yeah, I mean.
So if I go off topic just for 30 seconds. So a great analogy to what Rick just said. So since 1982, for a long time, the NBA has had a salary cap. And the players, for the most part, have shared the revenues with the league roughly 50-50. Now, if Todd and I are partners in a business from 50-50, the most important thing we can do together is figure out how to grow the business. It's not how to see if you can go from 50 to 51, or that's irrelevant in the big picture of things. And one of my frustrations with the Players Union for the last 40 years is that everyone comes in campaigning to run the union. I'm going to kick David Stern's ass. I'm going to kick. No, I never wanted to kick Todd Krinsky's ass. First of all, he's way too young. He'll probably kick my ass. But you know, we're partners, and when you're partners in a business, you have an alignment of interests, and you have to figure out. You know, if Alan doesn't show up for an appearance, or he doesn't want to go to China to sell shoes,
Which happened a lot.
it costs him a lot of money. And if you're his manager, and I was his manager only for the first 2 years. Because we were a little too disciplined. You know, you have to let your client know that if you want to make your brand with your name on it successful, there's certain obligations that you have, and that's why I don't believe it makes sense when you have these kinds of signature things to pay these guys enormous guarantees because they have to perform.
Yeah.
Are most people in the industry in both your positions? Are most people in the industry as rational as the two of you are? I mean, it's a great conversation, but it's a $2 trillion industry, and you are above the fray because you deserve it. You are above the fray because you have a lot of leverage. But guys who sell themselves as agents because they can check the box, not only kicking the retailer's ass, but getting a large shoe contract where they don't end up getting it. Does that poison the industry for guys who can do it right? Does that make your job harder? You know, difficult question, but.
I think there are a lot of, challenging personalities in the sports world, for sure, in the music world. And I think, you have to really make sure that the representation is really speaking on behalf of the athlete. I'll tell you, it sounds very logical, but I'll tell you half the time that I'm negotiating a deal, once the deal is done and I spend more time with that artist or that athlete, I learn what they really knew or didn't know through the process. David never had this problem. I can tell you firsthand when we were dealing with Alan, like everything, the athlete and management were in sync. But I think it happens a lot today because being an agent is a very fickle business. You can have the guy one day and not have him the next day. And so you're always just trying to prove that you can get the deal. And sometimes it's at, a loss for the kind of artist. So you got, when you're in the business for a long time, I think you can sift through who's legit and who's not. I think you can kind of sift out the good deal from the bad deal. But it's an industry with a lot of landmines for sure. Yeah.
David, if you could wave a magic wand, and this is part of the answer, and make everybody behave like you, it would be easy to do.
Well, I mean, for me, I was very young when I started representing these superstar players. I was like in my 20s when I had Phil Ford, who was the National Player of the Year. I was 31 when I represented James Worthy. And the pressure to perform internally, not from them, for myself, to feel you're representing the greatest players in the world, and you don't have years of experience like I have now. And more than anything else, I didn't want to do it the same way every time. I mean, that's the problem with the agent business today, is there's so many regulations that there are very few things that people could do. Now, if you think about this, okay, Jordan came out in '84, LeBron came out in 2003. Pretty big time difference. So Michael signed with Nike, Coca-Cola, McDonald's. LeBron signed with Nike, McDonald's, Coca-Cola. I love LeBron's marketing agent, Maverick Carter. I think he's really smart. And the stuff that he's done is not endorsements, it's entrepreneurial stuff behind the scenes, like his movie company and owning a piece of Carbondale bikes and the deal with the John Henry. I think that's really smart, and because Maverick is a very confident guy, you don't hear a lot about him. You know, LeBron's basketball agent, Rich Paul, gets way more publicity than Maverick, and I think Maverick has really done. And so the point I want to make is that you want to treat each player as an individual. If you're going to create an individual product in shoes and clothing, it's got to be based on the athlete's personality. I mean, if you look at women's sports today, and you look at the two great rookies in the WNBA, their personalities could not be more divergent. You got a woman from Baltimore who's really edgy, and and you got a girl from Iowa who's clean cut, Midwestern, and it's going to be a great rivalry. It's going to be like Magic and Bird in many ways. I think those two women will elevate the W. Now they both have signature shoes. One's with you, right?
Angels with us, yep.
Yeah, Angel Reese, and so. But when you go, so when I went into Nike in 1985, 1 year after we did the Jordan deal, it had enormous success. We tried to sign Patrick Ewing, and the guy who did the deal, unlike that fake movie Air, was a guy named Rob Strasser. I never discussed a shoe deal with Sonny Vaccaro in my life. And Strasser says to me, "Oh, let me guess, Air Ewing." And I won't repeat exactly what I responded to him because we're on tape, but I said, Michael is the Air Force and Patrick is the infantry. Michael plays with grace and style and Patrick plays with, force. So we're going to call his shoe the Force. But we never signed with Nike. And Nike created a whole line of people like Patrick Ewing, the Barkleys, the David Robinsons, the infantry in the trenches sweating, called the Force. And so the challenge is to, the thing that I hated the most is that after Michael's great success early on, for the next 10 years, it was like people trying to find the fountain of youth. Everyone was looking for the next Jordan. So there was a guy named Harold Miner, came out of USC, his nickname was Baby Jordan. He came out like in 93. There was Penny Hardaway, Ron Harper. Now they're saying that Anthony Edwards. And to me, there should never be another Michael Jordan. There should be the first whomever. Yeah. And that person's got to be in it. Now he can aspire like Kobe did to have some of the characteristics and the work ethic. But everyone should be different. And if they're not different, then they're not going to sell.
I do Rick wanted to say on LeBron, I think, he's one of the ones that got away. We had an amazing pitch for LeBron, and a couple years after we signed AI, and it's still heart-wrenching to this day. We had this amazing day with him, and we thought we had him that day, and some of you may have seen some of the videos that LeBron and Mav have shared about the fact that we gave him a live $10 million check to cash the next morning if he signed with us on the spot. It was anyway, he still had some obligations to Adidas and couldn't sign with us. But the interesting thing about LeBron is after we didn't get him, the summer league that's here in Vegas used to be in Boston. And I was down on the court for the first night, and he comes up behind, bear hugs me from behind, and he says, "Hey man, I just want to let you know that you guys get an amazing pitch, but it's business." And I just felt like Nike was where I needed to be. And I'm thinking, this kid's like 18, like he doesn't owe me anything. And that was the start of me just watching him. He had a good head on his shoulders from day one. And I think the other reason why LeBron and the team do so well is because I think they do something we talked about earlier. They really decide what they want LeBron to be and who he is, and they allow brands to participate and amplify that. That's a key thing versus like Nike does this with the athlete, and then Sprite does this. When you see LeBron, it's his authentic self, but it's also what he's telling these partners he wants him to be publicly. And then the power of all the brands amplifying that together, I think, is what makes it so special versus kind of being fragmented.
It's an incredible segue. Did you want to comment?
I was just going to say, so I'm a huge Shaq fan. I mean, first of all, the guy's in 90% of every commercial you see on TV, and he's endearing. He's like a big baby. I love the guy. But when Shaq was a rookie, Reebok did his first commercials, and they basically market him as what he is. He's like the Terminator. He's ripping down the backboards. And when you see Shaq play, just the sheer power and the force and size. His second commercial was with Pepsi, and Pepsi reprised a famous commercial from Coke, featuring a football player for the Pittsburgh Steelers named Me Joe Green, where he was like ferocious on the field, and he walks off the field, and he's a young kid waiting for him, and he hands him his jersey. Now, either of those roles could have fit Shaq well, but not at the same time. You can't be the Terminator and the gentle giant. You're either gentle or you're ferocious. And so I think when you're marketing a player as a company, as an agent, you've got to have a consistency. We try to market Michael. We never try to create, people said you created a role for Michael. I didn't create anything, I projected it. I understood what he was. He was the boy next door. He came from a 2-parent family. He went to college for 3 years. He went back and got his degree the year after he was drafted. He was a very normal guy off the court. On the court, he was incredible. And in all his commercials, he was just a very nice, sincere guy. Just the same thing on the video. He's just a very smart guy. And whatever role you analyze your client to have, you've got to project it across the platform with consistency.
I'm forcefully on the clock, but I just wanted to ask both of you to give me a minute for something that ought to take 20. Krinsky first, where is the business in the next 5 years, and what's the advice to these people?
I think the business overall is thriving in our industry. I think something's happening now that I think hasn't happened in a really long time, which I think is good for the consumer and good for the market. And it's maybe that kind of other brands are starting to emerge that maybe didn't have a shot before. So if you look what's happening in our industry, Nike is still the dominant player, but I'm sure you all see that they may not be as dominant as they were before. And I think you've got brands like Hoka and On coming in. You see more New Balance than you've seen before. We're starting to grow faster now. And I think it's a great time just for the marketplace to allow for more brands to participate, more new products to be launched, athletes to have different opportunities. So I think that's one thing that's happening. I think the other thing that's happening right now is that athletes and this next generation of young people, I think they do view themselves as being brands. They view themselves as being more than just players on and off the court. And I think brands are going to be challenged to how to work with athletes in the future. So in the beginning, when David and I were doing it, it was kind of an endorsement deal. Then it grew to kind of an endorsement with royalties. You can make more money as you sell more shoes. And I think now it's evolving to something else for the next 5-10 years, which is going to be how do you partner with these young athletes that really feel that they don't just want to be an endorser anymore. I think those days are kind of really starting to slow, and I think you got to figure out, and it's on us, it's on all of us. We're really trying to do some unique stuff with Angel Reese right now as our first player into basketball, as we start to challenge ourselves to how do we create authentic new stories for the next generation. So I think the business is going to grow. I think it's going to grow with more brands, and I think the challenge for all of us is how do you engage the next generation of athletes?
Professor, mentor, friend, as usual, last word.
So I think that the pandemic had an incredible effect on how we dress. I can speak for myself. I love clothes. I have a closet full of suits and sport coats. And for the last 3 or 4 years, I wear Lululemon, Jordan, casual. If I came to a conference 5 years ago, the idea of wearing athletic shoes would never have entered my mind. But the pandemic has changed the styles. And I think as Todd was saying, it's going to take brands like Lululemon that were really small. They're exploding. All these lifestyle brands are going to challenge the Nikes and the Adidases, the Goliaths of the business. And I think it's healthy because, way back in the Jordan, Ewing era, even Allen, if you were representing a player, you could go to Adidas, Nike, Avia, Converse, Reebok. There were British Knights. There were Spot Built. There were like tons of brands.
You're going back, British Knights.
Yeah. And today, if you've got a great player, you really have a choice of 2 companies, Nike or Adidas. If they don't like you, then you're in China with some of these other companies. So I think that the growth of new brands because of the enhanced attention to casual and lifestyle brands is a very, very positive thing, both for the athletes. The last thing I want to touch on, because Todd said a word that's like a hot button in my vocabulary, brands. You know, to me, a brand is something that is universally acknowledged. You see the, whatever they call the thing for Coca-Cola on the can, the little swiggle, and you know it's Coca-Cola. You see the swoosh, you know it's Nike. You see the Jumpman, everyone knows it's Jordan. You know, some of these players will never be brands. They want to be brands, and I'd like to grow hair, but it ain't going to happen. And I think you got to understand like who you are, and someone's got to say to you, you know, you could be a great endorser, but to be a great brand, there probably aren't 10 sports brands, athlete brands in the last 50 years. I'd say Muhammad Ali is a brand, Arnold Palmer's a brand, Michael Jordan's a brand. Just use the word brand, people use it very, very casually. And what happens is that some of the athletes get paid more money in guarantees from a shoe company than the total number of shoes they're going to sell in a year. And so it's a folly to think that those guys can carry a brand. And if you're the athlete, you don't want to be embarrassed where you can't even cover the guarantee. So I think there's got to be more discrimination by both the agents and the companies, and you just have to be more honest with your clients and, you know, and tell them you're not a starter, you're a backup. You know, you're a great endorser, you're not a brand. But I think with more companies coming into the marketplace, my guess is exactly the opposite will happen. And people who can't carry a brand will get signed by companies that are looking for a breakthrough. Reebok was the perfect company for Allen because they were incredibly established as a brand. They were doing really, really well, but they weren't that strong in basketball. So he sort of put them over the top. But for an athlete to start with a new company and be able to establish them is a challenge.
Classic entrepreneur, great guy, you, historic, amazing, hairstylist, all those really, 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 really
It's
good
consistent.
things.
My hairstyle is very consistent.
I will say one thing. As you all can see, this part of the industry and the industry in general is in great hands because of these two guys on the stage. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second keynote, Elevating Women's Sports, the Power of Strategic Brand Partnerships. We'll be featuring executives, Disney, this is Disney's panel, Disney and Google, special guest, former WNBA player Sylvia Fowles. They'll all be coming out in just a minute, but we'd like to talk for a second about the panel. Exciting lineup of speakers. To kick things off, we'd like to introduce our panelists. Molly Beck, the strategy lead of sports and entertainment marketing partnerships at Google. Molly, thank you for coming. Appreciate it very much. Sylvia Fowles, the retired WNBA player and a legend in women's basketball. Sylvia, thank you for being here. And last but certainly not least, Wendell Scott, SVP of Sales at Disney Advertising.
Morning. Morning, Rick. Ladies.
Wendell, how are you?
All right, thank you.
So, Wendell, let's talk about it first. How do you measure the success of these brand integrations in terms of advertising and advancing women's sports more than anything else?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. With us, we look at it as sort of a bit of a triangle, right? So with Disney, and more particularly ESPN, our mission, if you go to Bristol, Connecticut, you'll see it everywhere, is to serve sports fans anytime, anywhere. And we've been doing that. I think ESPN is going to have its 45th birthday this September. And we've had over 3 decades of serving women's sports in particular. 25 years with the WNBA, actually. So your career launched across the ESPN, so thank you for that as well. And when you think about also serving the athlete, right, and particularly women's female athletes, we want to make sure that we give them the best and the most exposure across the Disney portfolio and across the ESPN. In 2023, we did over almost 28,000 hours of women's sports across ESPN. So the athletes deserve that exposure. And if you're serving sports fans and serving athletes, that's where smart brands like Google come in. And they challenge us to figure out how they can use that background, that backdrop, to tell some of their best stories, sell some of their products and their services. And what we've seen is how we are measuring that success, in particularly, Rick, is in a lot of ways. One is by the amount of hours that we're giving to women's sports, but particularly I think everyone knows that there has been a huge increase in viewership and ratings. I think right now the WNBA is continuing to break records, right? Not just with attendance, but with viewership as well. We saw what happened with March Madness, and you can say March Madness for both men's and women's now. So you can say March Madness just once, and you know what that means. Actually outdrawing the men's tournament as well, so that's one other measure of success. And then right now, brands are flocking to Disney and ESPN to figure out solutions on how they can best market to the audiences and to the fans of women's sports as well. So when you take a look at how that triangle is working, I think it's working really well.
Molly, you've had tremendous partnerships all over the industry. Specifically, tell us about Google's role in supporting women's sports through those strategic partnerships.
Yeah, we've actually been on a journey for the last few years. Starting in 2021, we actually, prior to that, we had an internal team that was really passionate about looking at women's sports holistically. So not only the way that we invest in media, the way that we structure partnerships, but also how women's sports shows up on Google's platforms. A lot of people turn to Google and to YouTube to learn about women's sports, to engage. So really taking a thoughtful eye to those experiences in our own ecosystem. And one of the exercises that came out of that was to kind of say, if we wanted to spend with our partners and in media equitably, the way that we spend in men's sports and women's sports, what would need to be true? What would we need to do to make that happen? And when we did that exercise, we realized that there wasn't actually enough media inventory for women's sports in the marketplace for us to bring ourselves to parity. And so that led to a really productive conversation with our partners at ESPN to kind of say, if we come into this space, how do we create more access, more visibility, more awareness? How do we just open this up so that new fans can find it? And so what we did at the outset of our 2021 year was we partnered with the WNBA to make sure that we're investing with the league, with the rights, with the partners to make sure that we can authentically show up in the space. But then also work with ESPN to make sure that we are bringing additional games to air. So I think that was the 25th season of the W, and we brought 25 games, made sure 25 games were on broadcast in regular season to really help make it more accessible and open up that fandom. So that was kind of really where we started with partnerships. And since then, we've tried to kind of iterate, because at some point you'll reach a diminishing return on adding games. You can keep adding games, but there's so much more happening around women's sports than just the live consumption. So we've also been working with, in 2023, we partnered with The Athletic to make sure that they had enough staff on hand to cover women's sports to the extent and to the quality that they wanted to, as they double down on NWSL, WNBA coverage, Women's World Cup. And then we recently signed this year with the NWSL partners as a league partner, and then just yesterday announced a partnership with the Players Associations for the WNBA, the NWSL, and the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team. So there's a lot of different ways for us that we've approached partnerships. It hasn't always been media forward, it hasn't always been partner first, but they have all been kind of a mix of holistic tactics and different endeavors to kind of figure out the best way to make a positive impact in the space.
And your relationship with ESPN, Disney, et cetera, rock solid, right?
Yeah.
I hope so.
I don't know. We had a nice dinner.
Yeah.
I think we're
exactly.
doing okay.
Rock solid, continue to be rock solid. So, Sylvia, on July 10, Edjo Wilson joined you as the only two players in WNBA history with games of 20 points, 20 rebounds, 3+ steals. We talked about that on the beforehand, and 3 blocks. Both games came against the Storm. Share your journey and also how you've seen the fandom of women's sports evolve during your career.
Back when I started in 2008, I felt like a lot of my generation and generation before me was clawing to get the attention and a seat at the table. And now, leaving in 2023, you can see the evolution of the game. I think you guys can see the attendance that we get with these games and how much you all played a big role in making sure we get on TV. And so I think it's going to only get great from here on out, and we have a long way to go to try to level this playing field, but I think you guys doing a really good job of making sure you listening to us, putting us in the right spotlights, but also telling our stories and making sure we're being authentic to ourselves.
And so, talk about the changes then and now. I mean, now it's a little bit of a different perspective for you, but
Changes.
reflect. Do a little reflection.
Okay. So, like I said, when I first came in, we was sharing roommates. We was chartering. I mean, we wasn't chartering. We was flying regular commercial. But now these young ladies have charter. They get their own rooms. We have an unbelievable TV time, which is great. We get to show our faces, but also engage with our fans on a more authentic level and share our stories. And I think that's the most important part. And to continue to grow this game, I think it's also important.
Wendell, talk a little bit about specifics. Obviously, it's an incredibly creative world that you're involved in. Talk about the initiatives with Google that promote women's sports, the 50-50 initiative, in addition to Disney's additional purpose-driven programmings and offerings.
Sure. The real opportunity that Disney and ESPN capitalizes on is our opportunity to do the best storytelling in sports. And so, obviously we would not be here if it wasn't for something like Title IX, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that. So in 2022, Title IX celebrated its 50th anniversary. And much like in the 30 for 30 sort of realm, we did a 50 for 50, which we, found and sourced, 50 interesting stories of 50 interesting athletes who told how Title IX affected their lives, affected their ability to compete, and was the very beginning of what is now a bit more of an equitable opportunity for women's sports overall. So we launched that program. It started, each program and each episode started on ESPN and then lived going on and going forward on YouTube. Thank you, Molly, for that. And then Google really leaned into that, actually. Google and YouTube is like one of the leaders in finding creators and storytellers. And so they also helped and found and sourced, upwards of like maybe 5 stories across ESPN's 50 for 50 in telling stories in and around Title IX. What's really interesting is, we speak about this a lot, is the reason why, right? Why is women's sports having this insurgence? I wouldn't say resurgence because it's been here for a long time. It's having this insurgence right now. Is because I think not only are you seeing some of the best, competitive athletes in the world, but you're also learning a lot, about their stories as well. One of the things that we did going into the Women's Final Four this year is we did a behind the scenes with Caitlin Clark, Camila Cardoso, and Kiki Rice. And when you think that you know so much about them, the actual stories and how you can see their personalities sort of shine through. The interesting stories of Kiki Rice and, growing up in the DC area and what her family has meant to, politics, so on and so forth. Caitlin Clark being, a native of Iowa and playing for her, her hometown university and having a lot of success, obviously. And then Camila Cardoso coming from a very challenging part of Brazil. And you learn more about these athletes, and ESPN really leans into that storytelling. And what we did with Google, as I said, around 50 for 50 was a very, very good opportunity around that.
Yeah, and obviously we led with the kind of brand integration stuff because that's always more important today than it ever has been. Storytelling. You got to get behind those. That's exactly what you were just talking about. So Molly, as you discuss marketing partnerships with Disney and otherwise, audience engagement, marketing strategy, but also the importance of authentic partnerships to let you build the brand. Talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, I think what we have really enjoyed about getting started in women's sports was how much unique atmosphere there is. Sport is a passion point for so many people. It is a unifier across cultures, across communities, and so I think it's always been compelling to brands. But what we've really seen as women's sports has flourished, as partners and platforms like Disney and ESPN have brought more games, made, just opened the aperture to the experience, told more stories about the players. It's created an ecosystem that in some ways is very different than men's sports. And so it's allowed us to kind of try new things, to come in with partners that are eager and excited to experiment. And when Google gets involved, we really like to think about not only who we're talking to, the audience we're reaching, but how are we showing up with value? How are we adding something into that ecosystem? So we can show up, we can put our logo on things, that's fine. A lot of people have probably heard of Google already, so I don't know that logos alone are really going to do the job for us. So we really like to think about who is the audience, and if they are there because they love this sport, why are we there too, right? What are we bringing to the table as a partner that really is going to elevate that experience for fans? And so that's kind of allowed us to think through creative ways to address fandom. As Sylvia pointed out, fans are changing, and that's not just fans of women's sports. The moment and time we're in, they are engaging with content in a different way. They are curious about players and their personalities and their families and their lives in a different way. And Google can be a great resource for people to learn more and to get closer to what they love. So we really tried to think about what are the extensions that allow our technology to bring fans closer to what they love. And is that additional games that they can consume in live time? Is that content behind the scenes that we're capturing on Pixel phones and making available on social media? Is that search trends and illuminating kind of what is going on with the orange hoodie and what, whose shoes are those and who is wearing what in the tunnel? That type of dimensionality, I think, is really coming into just a renaissance around sport and women's sport in particular. And so as we show up as a partner, we're always trying to be thoughtful of not just how do we invest and show our support monetarily, but how are we thinking through the holistic fan experience and finding authentic ways to show up, whether it's with the league, whether it's with talent. So in 2022, we did our first kind of crossover spot featuring both WNBA and NBA players together, and really kind of bridging that divide to say fans are fans are fans are fans, but how do we acknowledge them for their unique tastes and interests, and how do we kind of meet them where they are in a way that feels additive and kind of not accretive.
Sylvia, you're pioneer. You've seen, we asked it earlier, not fair to reflect that this whole world, there's been such a sea change over the last few years that what it was like 5-10 years ago, nothing like it is today. But you're surrounded with life partners, friends, to help grow the business. How do the partnerships help overcome the perceptions of, lack of funding? There's some media perceptions about where women's sports has been.
Right.
How do these guys make the world easier, let's say?
I think just about putting us out. I think as you go to different levels of how you play, from middle school, high school, college, you picking up these new fans and you engaging with people that you're meeting for the first time. So having us have the ability to have our face in the community and making sure they get our stories out plays a big part. But just knowing that we're picking up fans across the board, and we want to be able to do it with the partners that we have.
Yeah, and so the partners you have, how do you build on the vision? And it changes so rapidly.
Right.
Today, all of a sudden the WNBA players are flying first class. How did that happen? I mean, and on and on and on. So tomorrow it could be much different, right?
It is. I think just understanding that we are multifaceted people. We're not one-dimensional. Yes, sports is what we do, but understanding that it's more to us than besides basketball. And I think understanding who we are and wanting to partner with us to get our stories out there plays a big part. But Google's been doing a great job. ESPN been doing a great job. Mael. AT&T, Voice in Sports. And so they played a big part in how we perceive ourselves and how we give ourselves to the community.
Yeah, and so these guys are 24/7. They're figuring out, right, how to make your league and everybody else in women's sports thrive,
Right.
not just survive. You get up every morning, and I know it's not on here, but you get up every morning and you say, how are we going to make women's sports better today? What are the 3 things I'm going to do today that are more creative than our guys down the street? And you're obsessed with all this, aren't you? In a good way.
Sure. So in thinking about that and answering that question, we think about what's next, right, at Disney and ESPN.
Right.
And there hasn't been a discussion with a marketer in sports over the last 12 to 24 months that hasn't talked about how to activate best against women's athletes in women's sports. And we have developed a marketing platform and initiative called Level Up, right? So what does that mean, right? You obviously see that the athletes and the exposure, they're definitely leveling up overall. How do we be the best consultants to help marketers show up authentically, right? How do we help them think about the messaging creatively? Because for the most part, sports has been sort of coming through like a male lens, even when it comes to marketing and advertising. So how do we lean into our creative resources to actually help marketers tell some great stories? And one of the other things that are very interesting, particularly across Disney and ESPN, when marketers have worked with our talent, for the most part, over the years, it's been a lot of our male talent, our male broadcasters on SportsCenter, or our former male athletes. But what we're proud about at Disney and ESPN is that we probably have the most female analysts, former athletes, broadcasters on SportsCenter, covering all types of sports. And there's a real opportunity for marketers to leverage what is the next generation, if you will, of broadcasters and analysts. When people say the future is female, the future is right now. So what we're trying to do is get marketers to level up in every single way in and around that investment to actually show that investing in women's sports actually can increase your KPIs, right? Get you there faster. We have a thing that we say at Disney and ESPN that investing in women's sports is good for business.
Follow up with that, and
Please.
then I want to ask the same kind of question to you. And it's easy because you do it every day. But social responsibility, we're in a state of flux now. The whole NIL with the college world, and should we say the high school and junior high school world too? I mean, it's how do we get we could easily say, how do you get the toothpaste back in the tube? But it's not. It's done. And so what do you think your role as really somebody that in many ways defines the future of women's sports, for example, is to help shape that debate, shape the governance, and not just the mundane, the relative conference realignment issues, but the whole moral issues of NIL and otherwise. How do you approach that?
Well, I think we have a huge responsibility. Actually, it is a big responsibility. Right? When you think about just coming off of the Women's Final Four over the last few years, actually, which has been just tremendous for us, like look at what came about at the WNBA draft, right? The highest rated WNBA draft that we've ever had. And so we have a real responsibility to have the right people in place to actually, tell the stories and represent the athletes really well. I think you might have seen across other platforms that sometimes there have been some missteps in actually, exactly what I'm talking about, and how they are, talking about, female competition, so on and so forth, or just competition. It's like almost like this game. It's like, you go to a different conference. It's like a drinking game. How many times? Every time you hear women's sports, you have a drink, or if you hear AI, the same thing. But the way we look at it is that if we are covering women's sports and female athletes authentically, giving them the most exposure across our platform as possible, and then also letting them actually come out front and tell their stories too, because what we've seen is outside of a handful of really good WNBA players, a lot of people didn't know too much. A lot of people are actually experiencing women's sports writ large at a heightened level every single day. And sports fans, they pride themselves on their knowledge of their favorite sport. And what we're just trying to do is to connect the actual fandom to the actual athletes. And if we do that really well, I think brands will show up and look to work more with ESPN and Disney and actually elevating the investment so that we won't have conversations around like how someone is actually getting to a game. No one actually ever thinks about that in a men's sport at all, right? People realize, Caitlin Clark came out and have, her shoe deal, but Sabrina Ionescu had her shoe deal a few years even prior to that. Yeah. And quite frankly, there's a small school right in the backyard of ESPN that has been probably like at the pinnacle of women's college basketball, like LSU as well. But so like it's been there. So this resurgence.
You said small school?
UConn, I meant.
I'm just trying to figure out what small means in that context. I mean, really.
Comparatively, if you will.
Yeah. Okay.
Comparatively, if you will. And so, like it's really interesting that we're having this conversation right now. We have a great game going on tonight. You have the WNBA All-Star game happening right now. There's just so much opportunity to actually cover women's sports authentically and make sure that brands are showing up in the right way.
Obviously, the great vision, great mandate. You should be excited to hear what your partner says. So the other partner, you've got a platform that gives you the ability not just to do a business deal, but basically a brand investment to be able to shape the future of the industry. You got activations, but you're looking toward the future as well. How do you ensure diversity, inclusion, good examples that dollars that are generated from your partnerships get spread around all sports, not just basketball, for women's sports. So, give us your philosophy on all that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The approach to sport is a little bit like the approach to marketing Google. Yeah. Google is a website for human beings that are interested in learning anything, something. Directions, recipes. If we paneled everyone with the last Google search they made, it would be pretty diverse, right? So we are speaking to and we are trying to connect to an incredibly broad audience. And when you parallel that to the types of fans, where they come from, their experiences, the players that they resonate with and why, the storylines that they're interested in, how they consume. Is it live games? Is it highlights only? Are they just following individual athletes for the gossip so they can keep up with friends at school? Like, fandom is so diverse. And so as we think through the way that we show up in sport, I think going back to my comment earlier about kind of the unique opportunity with women's sport is coming into its own in an era that is already incredibly open-minded. And so there's a huge opportunity to continue to keep this atmosphere that everyone is welcome at women's sports. And I don't know how many people in the room have been to a WNBA game, an NWSL game, a college softball game, a college volleyball game, a youth soccer game. Everyone should feel welcome in sport and in women's sport in particular. And so as we think through the way that we are showing up with our investments, we are trying to be very mindful about the partners that we're working with, again, how we show up with those partners, and then also being relevant in the markets and in the moments. So last year was the launch of Women's Premier League Cricket. And so a number of our local teams immediately reached out and kind of said, what are we going to do? When Google does women's sports, it's happening here. It's finally happening here. And so our strategy has to be nimble enough to say, what can we take from our forays into the WNBA in this market, or to Women's Super League, Arsenal, the Lionesses, Liverpool, our investments in Europe, our Aussie Rules, AFLW partnership in Australia, and how do we kind of connect the dots to make sure that whenever a new market comes online and has kind of found the property that they think is going to help them be really relevant and additive in the women's sports space, that we are sharing those learnings, and that we're being really thoughtful about what diversity looks like in that market, what those fans look like in that market, and continue to just kind of meet them where they are with what they're hoping to get out of their sports experience.
7-minute think about life-defining closing thoughts. We'll be back to you, so just think about it in a minute. But before we do that, responsibilities, obligations, players in this industry. You got two dynamic partners who will build the brands, whether it's cricket or basketball or golf or tennis or everybody else, and reach the moon with these astronomical numbers. What's the role of a female athlete today in helping to build the brand that's compatible to their corporate expansion of that brand? What's the obligation?
Making sure I'm showing up in every way possible. I think a lot of people associate me with just basketball and the things that I did on the court, but community work is also important. So making sure I'm showing up to these places that I played, making sure I'm engaging, make sure I'm giving out the proper information, making sure I'm answering the right questions about what it takes to get to this point, how are you mental at this point, and so just giving them as much as knowledge as I had or was given, and making sure I'm passing it on to continue the trend.
Molly, around the clock, and we're going to do this. We'll cut your mic. Oh, no, they only do that in presidential debates. They don't do it here. So we got a couple of minutes from you on where Google is not only today, but the industry, and where it's going to be in 5 years.
That's a good one. Didn't prepare that one in advance.
No, you wing it.
You're
it's
sneaky,
easy.
Beck. I think, we're not quite at 5 years from when we started our endeavors in women's sports, but we're getting close. What I was actually reflecting on recently, so I'm going to take the long way to your question, but I'll get there.
No, you do whatever you want.
Last week was the 25th anniversary of Brandi Chastain's famous goal, which took place at the Rose Bowl, which was just a few miles from my house. I grew up playing soccer, and that for me is a moment I will never forget. Like, it was a seminal moment in sport for me. And I've been thinking a lot about, where we find ourselves and where we think women's sports will be 5 years from now. And I think about that moment and what is it about this moment that's so different from 25 years ago? Why is there momentum now? And it is a factor not of talent. We have had talent in women's sport for so long. The product has always been so good. And I think about the responsibility of all of the players in the sports ecosystem to help keep momentum and build momentum, right? So when I watched the national team game in 1999, you watched FIFA and you watched the World Cup, and then the World Cup ended, and then there was, I'm dating myself, there was no internet. You couldn't keep up with those players again. You didn't see them until the next time they were on TV or the next time they were in Sports Illustrated or in the news. And that is completely changed in the moment in time that we're in. And momentum is lightning in a bottle. You can't decide when and where things are going to have momentum. And it is such a wonderful moment to find ourselves in, that a long-deserved part of sport, women's sport, has been waiting to be discovered, right? And they have had loyalists and true fans for years and years, and they've had deep talent for years and years of deep talent. So it's not about an individual. It's not about the name on the headlines right now. For me, this is a long time coming. And we finally kind of hit the magic moment where media is in a position to help amplify the story, to keep the momentum. Coverage is improved in a way that, you're getting prime time, you're getting, slots where it can be found without having to scroll to deep channels on your direct TV, or it's just this huge opportunity that we find ourselves in. And I think in some ways, if you flash back 5 years to what people thought today was, this would have been a dream. This would have been wouldn't it be wild if there was more interest in women's March Madness than men's? And that felt like kind of a radical hope, but an attainable hope, and we're in it. And so as I think 5 years from now, we kind of joke that in some ways I'm trying to put myself out of business with panels like this. A women's sports specific panel, 5 years from now, is it just going to be sports, right? Is it just going to be, we have men's, women's, it's just sports, and maybe that's where we'll be, and maybe it's not. But I think what we've seen over the last 5 is that like so much is possible. And when all partners in the ecosystem are leaning in to that same end, when brands are supporting the leagues, who are supporting the players, who are reaching out to the fans, who are engaging with media, it's all just one big ecosystem. And I think the more invested we all are, we're only going to continue to see this flourish.
Ground floor of a new world.
Yeah.
You killed it. Sylvia, interesting because it's LSU's always been dynamite football team, but now we got it not relevant to women's sports, but you got one of your baseball alums starting the All-Star game tonight, but his friend is one of the top gymnasts as far as impressions in history of the world. You got Angel, you got all of the LSU making a name for itself in all contexts. But look ahead, not just where LSU athletics are 5 years from now, but where this whole movement is and world 5 years from now.
Oh man, if I had to put in perspective of what I want my dream to look like for women's sports, especially basketball, I definitely would say more teams, one, bigger partnership, sponsorships, deals, and us making more money, of course. And I'm not talking about like making money like the men. I'm talking about just leveling out the playing fields and getting what we deserve and what's worth of what we do. If I had to choose those things, I think that's what 5 years would look like for us.
Yeah. Why not? So, Wendell, last word, okay? And by the way, the guys, it's when it says Disney advertising, just for a second, listen to the day job. He oversees advertising sales for WPP and Dentsu holding companies across Disney portfolio brands, ABC, Hulu, Disney Plus, Disney Channels Worldwide, Disney Digital, ESPN, Freeform, FX, National Geographic. And that's just until 4 o'clock, and you got other stuff going on. So talk about, from a broad perspective, about all of this. Where's the industry? Where's Disney's place in the industry 5 years from now?
So when I think about 5 years from now, ESPN and Disney is investing in that, right? So I'll give you a really good example. So we just recently renewed our partnership with the NCAA, right, for the next, I think, 8 years. And for the first time, there was equity in the investment and exposure between men's and women's sports. Because the way that we're going to get there, to what you were just talking about, Sylvia, and the way that you were talking about, Amali, that the differences between the investment, the opportunity, the viewership, the marketing opportunity between men's and women's sports will just be, as Molly was saying, what is the best thing I can do in sports right now, obviously. And that could be in and around investing with ESPN and Disney in and around women's sports. But it starts with how platforms like Disney and ESPN invest. So the next 5 years and the next 10 years coming, you will see a lot more from ESPN and Disney as relates to how we create more exposure for women's athletes, how we do our best to tell stories around competition, and how we also make sure that we give marketers the opportunity to market their products and services. Because we talk about women's sports, we haven't talked about fans, right? And when you kind of get back to it, I said that was our mission, to serve sports fans. And women's sports fans aren't just women, obviously. They are a diverse group of fans, male, female, diverse in race, in gender, in every way. And there are a lot of interesting ways to tell those stories. And to your point, we talk about being responsible. We need to be responsible in how we tell the stories about the diversity of the women who are competing in women's sports.
That's an amazing way to end, because we all want to be reassured. Believe it or not, Disney is even ratcheting up, has more of a commitment than they have been before. So it's gone from Titanic to unbelievable. Molly, Sylvia, Wendell, thank you very much. We all understand that the industry on the retail side is in great hands because of our first keynote panel. They're in even better hands because of these folks on the stage, and more to come, as we said. Thank you all very much. Appreciate the keynote for today.